Good evening. Let's have a word of prayer. Our Father in heaven, we thank you and we praise you for this day, how you bless us, Lord God. We pray that as we look into your word, you open it before us and help us understand it. Just show yourself to us through your word, Lord God. Help us to not just hear and learn your word, but also to obey your word. We'll give you the praise. And it's in Jesus' name we pray. And for his sake, amen. Tonight, we're going to be in Jeremiah chapter 8, verses 1 through 3. Jeremiah chapter 8, verses 1 through 3. Let me get my screen set so I can make sure I share that correctly. All right, here we go. So you should have it on your screen now. Can I get someone to read that? Jeremiah 8, verses 1 through 2 and 3.
Can you hear me, Ron?
Yes, I can.
Okay, here we go. At that time, declares the Lord, the bones of the king of Judah, the bones of its officials, the bones of the priests, the bones of the prophets, and the bones of the inhabitants of Jerusalem shall be brought out of their tombs, and they shall be spread before the sun and the moon and all the hosts of heaven, which they have loved and served, which they have gone after, and which they have sought and worshipped. And they shall not be gathered or buried. They shall be as dung on the surface of the ground. Death shall be preferred to life by all the remnant that remains of this evil family in all the places where I have driven them, declares the Lord of hosts.
Thank you. So that was Jeremiah chapter 8, verses 1, 2, and 3. As we turn to our lesson, I have this section is called No Honor for the Dead in the Land. And it begins by saying, at that time, verse 1, at that time, declares the Lord, which is looking back at Jeremiah chapter 32, which we covered, I believe we covered it last week, Jeremiah 32 and 33, 7:32 and 33. And if we go there, I'll share my screen again. Can somebody read that, please?
Therefore, behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when it will no more be called Topheth, or the valley of the son of Hinnom, or the valley of slaughter, but they will bury in Topheth, because there is no room elsewhere. And the dead bodies of these people will be food for the birds of the air, and for the beasts of the earth, and none will frighten them away.
Thank you. You might recall we talked about this one last week when he mentions the days are coming. Now, Topheth was a place where they sacrificed to the god Molech, the Ammonite god Molech. And Molech, of course, was a god that required child sacrifice. They would throw the children to the fire, burn it in the name of Molech. And this was the place where they did it. The son of Hinnom was simply a place of tombs. And so God was telling them the day is coming. We won't be called that anymore, but the valley of slaughter, because your bodies are going to be everywhere once I'm through with you. Once the Babylonians are done with you, there'll be so many bodies around, there'll be no place for them anymore, right? And the days that are coming, referring to the day when God's judgment is executed upon Judah by the Babylonians, right? And so that's what he's referring to when he says that over in chapter 8, when it says at that time he's referring to the same time as those coming days of Jeremiah chapter 32, right? It's a day of God's judgment. So they're going to lay waste to Judah such that there won't be any more room to bury the dead. And God, in this case, in chapter 8, is going to get very specific about how the passage back in chapter 7 is fulfilled. First of all, he says, the bones, I have it eclipsed here, the bones should be brought out of their tombs. and he mentions several groups of people who we brought out of the tombs. He mentions the kings of Judah and the officials. He mentions the priests and the prophets. Mentions the bones of Judah's inhabitants. And what these have in common is that they are all wealthy classes of people. And what's going to happen is when the Babylonians come, they're going to come and going to ransack their tombs and graves. You know, if you go to any modern day cemetery, you can tell which graves people spent more money in, right? They have an obvious look to them. They're a lot more ornate. Maybe the plot of land is a lot bigger. Maybe there's a large mausoleum on it, you know, especially if it's controlled by one family. And that's true in ancient times as well, that people would have graves that could be as large as a palace, like the Taj Mahal over in India. People think of that as a palace. It's not. It's a big tomb that the prince built for his wife, right? But it was very ornate. He was very wealthy. He threw all this money into this big tomb. So when the Babylonians come, they see the tombs of these rulers and kings and people like that, and they're going to raid them, pull their bodies out, you know, take their bodies out and steal everything they can. That's the idea. Those days are coming, and you're going to have people out there. The bones is now exposed out to the elements, right? And so that's what you have. This upper crust of people who've been dying from the beginning all up until now. They're going to find that their bones are going to be taken out of the tomb. So, you know, people who are living in Judah will recognize that people who they've been honoring in the past will simply lose their place. Their graves are going to be desecrated, and that's one of the signs of the judgment. I have here with the King Judah's officials. The kings and officials were the rulers of the people, and they would accumulate great wealth for themselves, following the example of Solomon and his son Rehoboam. And let's look at some passages here from First Kings. We'll see what the Bible has to say about that. So can someone read 1 Kings 5:13-17?
King Solomon. Oh, go ahead.
ahead.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
King Solomon drafted forced labor out of all Israel, and the draft numbered 30,000 men. And he sent them to Lebanon, 10,000 a month in shifts. They would be a month in Lebanon and 2 months at home. Adoniram was in charge of the draft. Solomon also had 70,000 burden bearers and 80,000 stone cutters in the hill country, besides Solomon's 3,300 chief officers who were over the work, who had charge of the people who carried on the work. At the king's command, they quarried out great, costly stones in order to lay the foundation of the house with dressed stones.
Thank you. And what Solomon's doing here is he's building the first temple there in Jerusalem. But what he's doing it with is he's using forced labor. There's another word for forced labor. What's that word called? Anyone?
Slavery.
Slavery, right. Right. He's forcing folks. He says he drafted. He's actually forcing people into slavery to build the temple. That's what's going on here. And so he's doing all this and laid his heavy burden on people to build the temple. Then you see about how much wealth he had. I'll read this one. 1 Kings 10:14-29. Now the weight of gold that came to Solomon in 1 year was 666 talents of gold, besides which came from the explorers and from the business of the merchants and from all the kings of the West. And the idea was that as explorers came through, the merchants came through, he taxed them. That was the idea. And from all the governors of the land, King Solomon made 200 large shields of beaten gold, 600 shekels. And what's the shekel here? 600 shekels is, 2/5 of an ounce, almost half an ounce. So you're dealing with something like 300, almost 300 ounces, which is be about 300 ounces is what, 20 pounds? Not quite 20 pounds of gold, which is a lot of money back then. And he made 300 shields of beaten gold and 3 minas 3 minas of gold into each shield. And the king put them in the house of the forest of Lebanon. And the king also made a great ivory throne. This is referring to, he's making his own palace here. And he overlaid it with finest gold. Of course, you get ivory from one place. That's the tusks of elephants. The throne had 6 steps, and the throne had a round top. And on each side of the seat were armrests and 2 lions standing beside the armrests. With 12 lions stood there, one on each side of the step on the 6 steps. These were all stone lions or marble, the like of which was never made in any kingdom. All King Solomon's drinking vessels were of gold, and all the vessels of the house of the forest of Lebanon were pure gold. None were of silver. Silver was not considered as anything in the days of Solomon. It's like he had so much gold that silver didn't even count. Because the king had a fleet of ships of Tarshish at sea with the fleet of Hiram. Hiram was a man who helped him build the temple. Once every 3 years, the fleet of ships of Tarshish used to come bringing gold, silver, ivory, apes, and peacocks. Thus King Solomon excelled all the kings of the earth in riches and wisdom. The whole earth sought the presence of Solomon to hear his wisdom, which God put into his mind. Every one of them brought his present articles of silver, gold, clothing, myrrh, spices, horses, and mules, so much year by year. And Solomon gathered together horses or chariots and horsemen. He had 1,400 chariots and 12,000 horsemen, whom he stationed in the chariot cities with the king in Jerusalem. And the king made silver as common in Jerusalem as rocks, as stone. So you think there was so much silver, it was like gravel in the street. He made cedar, which is coming from trees, as plentiful as sycamore of the Sephthalah. And Solomon's import of horses was from Egypt and Q. And the king's traders received from Q at a price. A chariot could be imported from Egypt for 600 shekels of silver and a horse for 150. So through the king's traders, they exported to all the kings of the Hittites and the kings of Syria. So Solomon had become very, very wealthy in his day, but the richest person in the world, right? And then it mentions Rehoboam. Now, Solomon had died. Rehoboam had come to king. And I don't want you to read the whole thing, but basically what was going on here was you had Rehoboam was now the young king in Solomon's place, and his advisors, the old men who advised Solomon, were saying, look, your father was really hard on us. Go easy and show compassion toward the people. They'll love you. They'll respect you. But the burden he put on us, why don't you lighten the load up a bit? And then he listened to the advice of the men he grew up with. And they said, you tell him I got more iron in my little finger than my father had in his old body, you know? And he listened to the advice of the younger men. And that comes up here in verse 12. Jeroboam, ironically, was a servant in Solomon's house. Now he become like the prime minister. But so can someone read verse 12 down through verse 15, please?
So Jeroboam and all the people came to Rehoboam the 3rd day, as the king said, come to me again the 3rd day. And the king answered the people harshly, and forsaking the counsel that the old men had given him, he spoke to them according to the counsel of the young men, saying, my father made your yoke heavy, but I will add to your yoke. My father disciplined you with whips, but I will discipline you with scorpions. So the king did not listen to the people, for it was a turn of affairs brought about by the Lord, that he might fulfill his word, which the Lord spoke by Ahijah the Shilonite to Jeroboam the son of Nebat.
Thank you. Like I said before, Jeroboam had been a servant of Solomon's, and God had told Solomon he's taking the kingdom away. You know, you're going to lose this nation because you departed from me. You left me, basically. And so he goes, your servant's going to rise up and become the king, right? And so what happened was Jeroboam represented people who were part of the northern kingdom, and they came to the king Rehoboam, who was Solomon's son, and they asked him to go easy, and he wouldn't. He went harder. The idea of yoke being heavy is that slavery thing going on, right? and the taxation thing going on, being whipped. This is forced labor. This wasn't the biblical description. We talk about the kind of slavery that the Hebrews were allowed to engage in. We voluntarily sold yourself in order to make some money to get back out of trouble, and they couldn't whip you and things like that. They'd let you go for 7 years. This is not that. This is more like what happened down south in America, right? He's just treating them cruelly, and his son is even worse. The idea of disciplining somebody with whips. I'll use scorpions. The scorpions are of course poisonous, and that led to a revolt, and the people followed Jeroboam, and they started the kingdom of Israel to the north, and so the kingdom was taken away from the house of David. It became a divided kingdom from that time on. You end up with Israel to the north and Judah to the south. Point I'm making here is that Solomon started this whole thing with the forced labor and the heavy taxation. He acquired all his wealth to himself, and all the kings and officials from that time kept doing the same thing. They were no different than Solomon. They followed the example of him, and they followed the example of his son Rehoboam, which was why I have in the lesson there. Let's look at Deuteronomy, what it says. This is very interesting here. 17, verses 14 through 17. Deuteronomy 17, verses 14 through 17. This is God talking to the people of Israel. This is uh, was it about 500 years before Solomon's time. Moses is talking before they come into the promised land. And can someone read that, please?
When you come to the land that the Lord your God is giving you, and you possess it and dwell in it, and then say, I will set a king over me, like all nations that are around me, you may indeed set a king over you, whom the Lord your God will choose. One from among your brothers you shall set as king over you. You may not put a foreigner over you who is not your brother. Only he must not acquire many horses for himself, or cause the people to return to Egypt in order to acquire many horses, since the Lord has said to you, you shall never return that way again. And he shall not acquire many wives for himself, lest his heart turn away, nor shall he acquire for himself excessive silver and gold.
So which of those things is Solomon disobeying?
All of them.
All of them, right? Every last one of these things he broke. That's why his heart turned away, you know. And now there's a bit of a, not quite a setup going on, but there's a point to be made here that he indeed, the only thing they did right here was, well, at least he was Jewish. He was an Israelite, but that was about it. After that, he started getting all these horses, particularly from Egypt, and they were told never go back to Egypt. Now here they are making treaties with Egypt, going back and buying horses and stuff. He acquired all these women. That's in the previous verses here, but he had these 1,000 women, 700 wives, 300 sexual slaves, concubines. He acquired all these horses. He acquired all the silver and gold. Every last thing he did here was in violation of the simple commandment. The king has got to keep it plain and simple. Of course he could be a little bit more than everybody else. He's still a king, but come on. What was he doing? And that's the idea here, is that he broke all these commandments, and my point I'm making is all the kings that follow him were doing the same thing. That's what they follow his example. So the kings and the officials of Judah, the rulers, they're the ones who are doing all this. It is their bones that's going to be exposed by the Babylonians. Now, these people have now been dead for almost 1,000, not 1,000 years, but they've been dead for about 500 years or so, and they're in these big ornate graves. When the Babylonians come, they could care less who's in the graves. They're going to take those bodies out of the graves. They're going to ransack the graves for anything that's in them, right? He mentions also the priests and the prophets. These were accustomed to accepting bribes and payment for their services. Let's look at Micah, a book I rarely people go to. Micah chapter 3, verses 9 through 12. I have some questions coming up here. Will someone read that, please?
Hear this, you heads of the house of Jacob and rulers of the house of Israel. who detest justice and make crooked all that is straight, who build Zion with blood and Jerusalem with iniquity. Its heads give judgment for a bribe, its priests teach for a price, its prophets practice divination for money, yet they lean on the Lord and say, is not the Lord in the midst of us? No disaster shall come upon us. Therefore, because of you, Zion shall be plowed as a field. Jerusalem shall become a heap of ruins, and the mountain of the house a wooded height.
Thank you. That's a picture of the people who are in charge, the rulers. These are the officials, right? And he also mentioned the priests and the prophets. Here they are doing things they're doing it for the money. Now, bear in mind, the priests did make a living off the people. When you brought an offering and things like that, you gave it to the priests. That's how they ate. But they weren't doing it because of, you know what I mean? They aren't doing it because of the money. A church might pay its pastor, but hopefully the heart of that pastor is to do it because of the money. There's a distinction there. They're doing it because they get the money. They're getting rich out the people. That's what it says. They give judgments for a bribe. Hey, if you pay things, if you make things go my way, I'll give you extra money for it. The prophets practice divination. Do you know what divination? What's divination? Open question, essay question. What's divination? Anybody know? Anyone?
Done by
I didn't hear that.
there's something that the sorcerers do.
Yeah.
Like reading
Divination.
bones or something?
Yeah. What it is you're trying to discern spiritual things using natural events, right? So they might take the chicken bones and throw it out into the ground, try to read the bones and see what's happening in the spiritual world, right? Tell you your future, whatever else it is, or what's going on. They might take tea leaves, so throw tea on the ground and read that. They might take entrails of an animal and do that. They look at stars are natural things, and try to discern what's going to happen based on what they see in the stars as far as your future. They might look at your palm reading. All those things are divination, right? You know what a divining rod is? Does anyone know what a divining rod is?
Use
Yes.
it to find water. Yeah.
Yeah, they're using divination, right? The reality is a piece of wood cannot find water in the ground. But people had this belief that they walked around that somehow this wood would be guided to point to where the water was, like a Ouija board, answering yes and no to all your questions. That's divination. That's the idea. And that's why it's called a divining rod. Okay. There's a way to find water scientifically. Walk around with a piece of wood in your hand ain't it. That's just superstition. It's something that believers should not, that we should engage in any kind of divination. Here are these prophets. The prophets of God are practicing divination for money. Yet they lean on God and say, hey, isn't God with us? Well, the answer is no, he ain't with that. No disaster should come upon us. Well, not until the Babylonians come, right? That's what he says. Well, because of you, talking about you leaders and you priests and your prophets doing all this kind of stuff, Zion will be plowed over like a field. It'll just be taken over, and Jerusalem will become like a heap of ruins. In the mountain of the house, a wooded height. That is this palace and this temple you built become nothing but a pile of wood, right? Like you see a house torn down, the pile of wood is left. That's always going to happen because they're doing these things. And this is what Jeremiah is talking about in our text, right? All these things that's happening. The other group was Jerusalem's inhabitants, because it says in the text, and the bones of all the inhabitants brought out of their tombs, right? Now, obviously, these are wealthy inhabitants. Otherwise, there's no reason to rob their graves. I can go to any given cemetery. I'm here, some of you are not in Youngstown, but I'm here in Youngstown, Ohio. I can go to any given cemetery and I can tell you which graves cost a whole lot of money. And you probably can't, if you just pay attention. You could tell which ones cost, a lot of money versus which ones didn't cost so much money, right? Most graves look exactly alike. But there are a few that are very distinctive. They put a lot of money to make it look very distinctive. Maybe the mausoleums, think about the one on the south side, right? You have these big mausoleums built to the side of a hill with some of the famous families from Youngstown that are in there. and or they have big ornate amphitheaters built around the grave of one single person. You know what I mean? And so if you found an inhabitant of Jerusalem living in a grave like that, he's rich, or he was rich. And back in those days, it was common to bury a person with their possessions. And today people learn things like, well, take off the rings and jewelry right after the calling hours before you close the casket up. But back then, they left all the stuff on them. People come and rob their graves. But in the case of Babylon, they'd come not only rob their graves, but take the bodies out of their graves because the graves are so ornate. The grave itself had value, right? And that's the idea there. Are there any questions so far? All right. So I have some of you. Let's go to Proverbs chapter 30, verses 7 and 8. This is a king whose name is, well, 7 through 9, I'm sorry. This is a king whose name is Agur. And he's talking to God. All right, can somebody read that, please?
The things I ask of you, deny them not to me before I die. Remove far from me falsehood and lying. Give me neither poverty nor riches. Feed me with the food that is needful for me, lest I be full and deny you, and say, who is the Lord? Or lest I be poor and steal and profane the name of our God.
Thank you. So this prayer he's asking for God is a prayer. He's praying for just enough. That's what he's doing. First of all, he says, he'll take away falsehood and lying from me. Then he says, give me neither poverty nor riches, right? But feed me the food that I need to have. He says, lest I be full, if I have too much, I might deny you. When you get when a person gets wealthy, there's a tendency to start trusting your wealth and forgetting about God. That's just there. The Bible never says being wealthy is wrong, but it does give a lot of caution with it, because the tendency is to start denying God, or you become poor. And a poor person might be tempted to steal. You might say, well, he's poor, he's justified. Stealing is still a sin. And so he would profane the name of God. And this guy says, well, just give me enough. I don't want to be in a place where I'm forced, I want to steal, or be in a place where I deny you, right? You remember we said that did Solomon stay faithful and worship only the Lord his God? That's the question.
Right?
Does Solomon remain faithful and worship only the Lord their God, Lord our God?
No,
No.
No. What took him away from doing that?
Well,
worshiping
Well,
other gods. Well,
yeah, and what else? Something in particular did it too.
All them wives.
women, his
All
wives.
those women, his wife, he made a bunch of
Mhm.
pagan women, right? What David did, not David, what Samson did one time with Delilah the Philistine, right? And she kind of led him away. Solomon did 1,000 times over. All these foreign wives, these pagan wives, and an Israelite among them. So they led him off to other gods, including what I would say, in my mind, the worst. I know God, there's no bad sin, but Molech. The man's worshiping Molech, Solomon. How do you worship Molech? By child sacrifice. Get in your mind for a minute. He did all this stuff. He became very wealthy, and he became very, very worldly. That's what Solomon's life was. Later when he writes the book of Ecclesiastes, he's basically writing from the point of view of a person whose life was a miserable failure. He's saying all the stuff I did, that was useless, that's vain. Don't do that. But he lived his life in vain and very futilely and wasted away. And as an old man, he's regretting it. He's writing this book of Ecclesiastes, which is why the book has that tone, right? But that's the idea there, is that he didn't listen to Agur here, or he didn't obey Deuteronomy for that matter. Okay, so we read that. So let's look at 1 Kings chapter 3, and I'll read this for myself. It's a little bit long. Now I'll ask some questions based on it. At Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream by night, and God said, "Ask what I shall give you." And Solomon said, "You have shown great." This is in Solomon's better years as a young man. "You have shown great and steadfast love to your servant David, my father, because he walked before you in steadfastness and righteousness and in uprightness of heart toward you. And you have kept for him this great and steadfast love, and have given him a son to sit on the throne this day. And now, O Lord my God, you have made your servant king in the place of David my father, though I am but a little child. I do not know how to go out or come in. And your servant is in the midst of a people whom you've chosen, a great people, too many to be numbered or counted for multitude. Give your servant, therefore, an understanding mind." This is where he's asking God for wisdom. "To govern your people, that I may discern between good and evil. For who is able to govern this, your great people?" It pleased the Lord that Solomon asked for this. And God said to him, "Because you asked this, and have not asked for yourself long life, or riches, or the life of your enemies, but have asked for yourself understanding to discern what is right, behold, I will now do according to your word. Behold, I give you a wise and discerning mind, so that none like you, or none like you has been before you, none like you shall arise after you." Verse 13, "I will also give you what you have not asked, both riches and honor, so that no other king shall compare to you all your days." In verse 13, upon the receipt of riches, that kind of took Solomon downhill after that.
Mm.
You know, he let it go to his head, right?
Mhm.
God gave him what he didn't ask for, and Solomon just started putting his trust in it. And I actually gave the answer away. You know, the result in Solomon's life, what was it? We said it in the lesson. What's the result in Solomon's life of God giving him everything? We just said it.
About good time.
Turned his heart away from
Okay.
God.
What was that?
He turned his heart away from God. All
He
the
turned his
riches.
heart away from God. That's right.
Mhm.
Luke chapter 12. I don't know if I want to go to the whole thing or not. Let me see. Yeah, we can go there. Can someone read that one, please? 13 to 21.
Someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." But he said to him, "Man, who made me a judge or arbitrator over you?" And he said to them, "Take care and be on your guard against all covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions." And he told them a parable, saying, "The land of a rich man produced plentifully. And he thought to himself, what shall I do? For I have nowhere to store my crops. And he said, I will do this. I will tear down my barns and build larger ones. And there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, and be merry." But God said to him, "Fool, this night your soul is required of you. And the things you have prepared, whose will they be? So is the one who has a treasure for himself and is not rich toward God."
Thank you. So the question I have in the sheet, we'll get back to it in a moment, is what is Jesus warning against? He's warning against one thing here. What's he warning against?
Covetousness.
Right, what
Covetousness.
is that? What is that?
Greed.
Greed. Be careful against all kinds of greed. Now, what makes this an issue of greed is you get back to the Old Testament, the rule of the inheritance. You know, when you had some sons who were going to inherit things from their father, the oldest son got twice as much as the other ones. That's the idea there. So when you have someone saying, tell my brother to divide the inheritance, he's aware that his brother got more than him, being older. Okay? He wants some of that too. And that's the idea. So Jesus knows the man's specifically being greedy. He says, watch out for being all, watch out for greed. He gives him this parable to back up the story. You can't take it with you, right? But he says, watch out for greed. So he's warning against greed. Let's look at, I want to say 1 Timothy chapter 6, 17 to 19. Can somebody read that, please?
As for the rich in this present age, charge them not to be haughty, nor to set their hope on the uncertainty of riches, but on God, who richly provides for us with everything to enjoy. They are to do good, to be rich in good work, to be generous and ready to share, thus storing up treasure for themselves as a good foundation for the future, so that they may take hold of that which is truly life.
Thank you. So in this case, what, and the question is going to be here when we go back to it, what is Jesus encouraging us to do in that passage? He's encouraging us to do a few things. What is it? Or he's also encouraged not to do some things, though, as well as encouraged to do things. What things does he? There are two things he encourages us not to do. What is it?
To be haughty,
Yeah,
Not to
what
be
is haughty?
haughty,
Be
What
haughty.
is haughty?
high-minded,
High-minded or proud, right? Okay, what else?
Put our hopes in it.
Don't put our hopes in it. Okay. What does he encourage us to do?
rich in good
Do
work,
good.
Generous.
Do good
Do
work.
good, to be
Be
rich in good
generous.
works, and be generous, and
be
what else?
generous, share.
Share.
You're going to share, right? And
Set
he
our
calls
hopes
that,
on God.
where's that at?
It says, set your hopes on God,
on
who
God.
richly
Where, oh,
provides us
yeah,
with
yeah, yeah, yeah,
everything
yeah.
to
You're right.
enjoy.
Yeah, not to set your hopes on, but on God. Right, right. Yeah, we missed that one. Right. So you set your hopes on God, do good, be wishing good works, be generous, be ready to share. Verse 19 agrees with what he told that young man about storing up riches in heaven. How you do that? Well, that's how you do it. Those other things. You know what I mean? Thus, storing up treasure for yourself is a good foundation. Now, at no point here is he telling you being rich is wrong. What he is telling you is don't be greedy, be ready to share it. That's the idea. Now, when I say that, people often default to, oh, good, I'm allowed to get rich. And they're focusing on the wrong thing. I'm not saying this so that we can conclude God wants us to be rich, right? Because God may ask of us, we told the one young man, give away all you have and give it to the poor. Remember that one young man he told, the man walked away sorry because he had many riches? You know, that time might come for us. We're told to surrender everything, right? And there's nothing about it that says he can't do that. God can do whatever he wants, and he does whatever he wants. The point here is if you happen to be wealthy, this is the encouragement for you. You know, don't be proud. Don't set your hopes on your stuff, but set your hopes on God and you know, God gave it to you. He provided everything for us to enjoy. He says, do good works, be generous, be ready to share. That's the idea, you know. That's the idea there, right? Something that those kings of Israel in the Old Testament didn't learn. All right. Any other questions?
Right
To go
now,
on?
you know, with are you can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear
With
you.
social media and what's going on in around the world,
Mhm.
everybody wants to be rich. Everybody
Sure.
wants to be show off their stuff. You know, it's like it's encouraged right now. If
Yeah,
if you if you if you don't want to be rich, people think something's wrong with you.
yeah, yeah. But you know, that's the way the world is, right?
Yeah.
You know, you know, the Bible really tells the world one thing. It tells it to repent. Everything else is really well talking to us. You know, Second Timothy or First Timothy 6 is talking to believers, not to unbelievers.
Mm.
You know, he won't. He doesn't tell people in the world, you know, be generous toward others, except that they might see their spiritual need. You know, we told the rich young ruler who asked the question, "What must I do to get into your kingdom?" Well, you got the law. What's it say? Well, you know, don't kill, don't steal. I've done these things since my youth. Well, sell everything you have, give it to the poor. The man went away sorry, right? Because he had a lot of things. And Jesus then concludes, it's easy for a rich man to walk through. I'm sorry, easy for a camel to go through the eye of a needle. And the word needle in Hebrew, in Greek, is actually a sewing needle, which was been around for 7,000 years. It's not a gateway. People think of that. You know, easy for a rich man to go through the eye of a needle. Then it's for a rich man to go into heaven. But he goes on to conclude, but with God, all things are possible. There has to be a supernatural change here, right? So the only reason why he would tell a rich sinner to do that, so the sinner could see a spiritual need, you know, because there's no way naturally he wants to give up his riches. It goes against common sense. It goes against what we're taught in social media, as you just said. You know, it goes against that. where Christians maybe have a certain calling in life to go some other country that's poor. Guess what you're taking with you? A bunch of your money. That's not going to happen in other countries. You might become a missionary in some poor country. And I keep thinking about, what's her name? The Indian nun. What's her name? The one they beatified. Teresa. Mother Teresa. Right? You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
And now I can't speak to a spiritual state. That's not my job to judge that. But what I'm saying here is that is a good picture of someone who gave up everything for the sake of the mission. Everything. Literally, she lived as poor as other people in India did, and she didn't have to, being a nun. Have become a very famous nun. But it's just a picture I'm trying to draw up there. Maybe God might call you to that. And oftentimes he'll say, like in James, he calls the poor of the world to be rich in faith. That kind of thing. But there's nothing wrong with being rich, but with riches comes the danger of a person setting their hopes in their riches. And that happened here in ancient Israel. It says in 8 verse 2, and they shall spread, referring to the bones of these people, they shall spread before the sun, the moon, the hosts of heaven, which they have loved and served and gone after, which they have sought and worshipped, and they shall not be gathered or buried. They shall be as dung on the surface of the ground. The text goes on to say that they love, serve, gone after, sought, and worship the sun, moon, and stars, which the Bible calls the hosts of heaven. The bones of these groups that we already mentioned, kings, prophets, priests, officials, by Jeremiah's time, they're long dead, but they'll be dug up and they'll be exposed. I have notes here, the wealthy are putting great effort into protection of their grave sites, lest it be robbed. In this case, that protection means nothing. In an ironic twist, their bones are now exposed to the things they once worshipped in their idolatry. They worshipped the stars. They worshipped the sky and things in the sky. We go to a couple of passages here just to back that up. Jeremiah 9:22. Speak, declares the Lord. The dead bodies of men shall fall like dung upon the open field, like sheaves after the reaper, and none shall pick them up. None shall gather them. Somebody read Deuteronomy 4:19.
And beware, lest you raise your eyes to heaven. And when you see the sun and the moon and the stars, all the host of heaven, you will be drawn away and bow down to them and serve them. Things that the Lord your God has allotted to all the peoples under the whole heaven.
Right. So he says, beware of that. Beware of being drawn away and bowing down to these natural things. You see the sun. The sun's great. Gives us warmth and heat and light, but don't worship it. It's just a ball of fire in the sky, right? Moon's wonderful. It goes through different phases, crescent moons and half moons, things like that. And stars are great to look at nighttime. Don't worship stars. Don't worship the moon. Don't worship the sun. They're not gods, right? Everybody has access to these things. It says he allotted this to all peoples under the whole heaven. Everybody sees the sun and the moon and the stars. No one is called to worship these things. Worshiping the heavenly bodies is sin. Like worshiping anything else other than God is sin. And so he prohibits them from worshiping astronomical bodies. It says they shall not be gathered or buried. They shall be as dung. As though earlier there'll be no room for burial. Dung is a waste product that's discarded. By the way, it's also used as fertilizer. That's when spread upon the ground. That'll be the use of the dead. So this spread around like fertilizer. Just discard it like that. Chapter 8, verse 3. Death shall be preferred to life by all the remnant that remains of this evil family in all the places where I've driven them, declares the Lord of hosts. The people place great importance on honoring the dead. Even today, think about that. Today, we spend thousands of dollars in funerals and will be angered if we learn that people were digging up the remains of our loved ones out of their graves for the sake of the riches and left them unburied. So think about that loved one you may have buried. It could be a parent, a spouse, a child, a brother, or sister, and you learn that people went to their graves and dug them up and left their bodies out there, but rifled through their pockets, took anything out of value. Would you feel good about that?
No.
No, nobody feel good about that. They wouldn't back then either. But this is exactly what happened, right? And this is exactly what Jeremiah says is going to happen when the Babylonians come. They're going to do all this stuff, rob these graves. The people of Judah could do nothing about it because the ones who are alive were taken away as slaves. That would be the reality in Judah, right? And yet, for all the horror of seeing the grave desecrated, death was still preferred by those who remained. He says in the end of verse 3, he says, death shall be preferred to life by all the remnant of the remains of this evil family and all the places where I've driven them, declares the Lord of hosts. And where he drove them is Babylon. That's akin to saying that they preferred death to life in Babylonian slavery. You know, once they got to Babylon, they realized they're not going to like it there very much. Job chapter 3, 20 through 26, Job shares not about the same thing, but the same emotion is there about wanting to die rather than to live. And it's all because of his suffering that he's going through. Let's look at that. I'll go ahead and read it. He says, why is light given to him who's in misery, and life to the bitter in soul, who long for death, but it comes not, who dig for it more than hidden treasures, who rejoice exceedingly and are glad when they find the grave? Why is light given to a man whose way is hidden, whom God has hedged in? For my sighing comes instead of my bread, my groanings are poured out like water, for the thing that I fear comes upon me, and what I dread befalls me. I am not at ease, nor am I quiet. I have no rest, but trouble comes. Who go on to say, I wish I was dead, I wish I was dead, I wish I was dead. This is Job talking to his friends about how bad off he's feeling right now. And that's the idea of the people in Babylon, is that they're going to wish that even though these horrible things happen to their loved ones, they're going to wish they'd rather be dead than where they are. Any questions so far for Ask My Own? Okay. True or false? There's nothing wrong with seeking advice from the stars, moons, and planets.
False.
False. Now that's a kind of divination. What's that divination called? We see it all the time today. What is that called? Astrology.
Astrology. Yeah.
That's right. Astrology. Trying to discern spiritual by looking at the moon or the stars, right? If you ever know someone who's into what was it called? There's a thing out there where you get somebody's birthday and they go through the cycles of their life. They're actually engaging in astrology because the reality is once they know your birthday, they know your star sign. You know, you get into all that kind of stuff. That's just more divination.
Yeah, horoscopes.
Yeah, horoscopes and things like that, right? But I can't think what the other thing was called. It was called, I can't think, when you get a person's birthday, without saying you're an astrologer, they just ask for your birthday, and they say you follow a life pattern a certain way based on the year you were born. But what they're really doing is, if I found out what your birthday was, I'll know what your sign is. Now I can chart your stars. But I'm acting like it's a different thing. Something sign is not. It's just the same old thing, right? But yeah, horoscopes and things like that. Very popular. To this day, people ask, what's your sign? What's your sign? What's your sign? They ask me that. What's your sign? The cross. Never heard of that. What kind of sign is that?
I always say the cross. The cross.
Yeah, the cross. Cross is my sign. All right, multiple choice. And I got several things. More than one could be correct. What is done good for? A, to be kept and treasured in a vault.
No.
No.
To be discarded as waste, like incinerated.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's how we do it in modern days, right? They used to bury it deep in the ground. Now we literally incinerate it literally today. To be displayed prominently in a home like a table centerpiece.
No.
Yeah. No.
To be spread about like fertilizer on the ground.
Yes.
Yes.
Now I'm saying this because that's what he's comparing these bodies to, being laying around in Judah, right? Like dung, just laying around, right? It's something that we don't do to our dead. We don't do that, whether they're cremated or not. We don't do that. We give them places of honor. They may have been cremated. We put them in urns. Where do you put them at? Some prominent place we remember them by. We might bury them in a plot where they're not cremated. Whatever it is, we treat the dead with honor. We just do. All right. In modern day funerals, I have this here, we treat the remains of our loved ones, like a waste product.
False.
False. Like something to be honored with memorial stones, even if cremated.
True.
True. We'd be happy if someone dug them up and took their clothes, left them lying around.
No.
False.
Right. According to Jeremiah 8, what will the Babylonians do to the remains of those kings, officials, prophets, and priests of Judah who had died?
Unearth them.
Yeah.
Expose them to the elements.
Yeah, they're going to do all the things that we would want done to our loved ones. Right.
Yeah.
And they wouldn't want them, think about it, these are their prominent people. They don't want it done to them either, but it's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And it says, but they'll wish they were dead. Where else in the Bible will people long to die as a result of God executing his judgment? There's another place in the Bible. Revelation. That's right. Revelation. God's going to send those demon locusts. Remember those things?
Mm-hmm.
And they're going to sting people. They're going to want to die, but they can't. Remember I said before that the plagues of the future, like the plagues of the past. The big difference is that in the last days, these things are global, all over the world. In the old days, they're focused on certain areas like Judah, right? So here in Judah, they're going to want to die because they're Babylonian captivity. In the future, it'll be the entire planet being tortured by these things, and they're going to want to die, and death will elude them, right? I just saw the similarity there. And both are a result, by the way, of God judging the world. Are there any other questions or comments or anything?
I have a question.
Sure, go ahead.
Remember when you referred back to the rich young ruler who Jesus told him to go sell all that he had, and he went away sorrowful?
We didn't read that, but I referred to it. Yeah,
you referred to it. I don't know where it's in the Bible. I don't know if it's in the Bible, but someone kind of referred to the fact that this young man did eventually come back to Jesus. Have you heard of that? They did sell everything?
That's not in the Bible.
Okay.
I already know that's not in the Bible.
Because I couldn't find it.
Yeah, you won't find it.
Okay. I was just, somebody was telling me, I was like, I can't find it. And I looked and I couldn't find it.
Yeah. Usually people say that. If people say it to me and I know it's not there, I'll ask them to show it to me. Show me. If they show me, fine.
I couldn't really ask him to show it because he was preaching from the pulpit.
Oh, well, I would ask him afterwards then. After that, I would ask him.
Yeah.
Especially if I know him. I say, hey, can you show me where that is? I've done that with pastors before.
I've done that before, and this particular pastor didn't receive that too well.
Well, that's sad. One of my favorite passages of the Bible, I have a lot of favorite ones, but one of my favorite ones is Acts 17:11. You know what that one says? And some of you here from the old Berean fellowship, right? And what scripture was the church's name based on? Do you remember?
They searched the word.
Yeah.
They searched the scriptures.
That's Acts 17:11, right? That when they heard the word preached, they were more noble than it was in Thessalonica. When they heard the word preached, they wouldn't search scriptures daily to see where those things were so. Here's the question. Who were they questioning when they searched the scriptures?
Their teachers, the ministers.
The teachers.
Which particularly who in particular?
The priests. The priests.
In the context. Who's preaching the gospels? Who?
Paul.
Acts 17. Paul. How much of the New Testament did Paul write? You ain't got to name the books. About percentage-wise, how much? Do you
50%.
know? Almost 50%, right.
Almost 50%.
Almost 50%. This guy actually had the gift that God given him. He actually was inspired to write the revelation of God down in his word to the point that it's equal to what Moses wrote, that it had to be perfectly right. He could say, God used me to write his word, to reveal things you don't know before. I'm used this way. And they questioned him. And they were praised for questioning him. You get it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, if the Apostle Paul can praise the Bereans, or Luke can praise the Bereans for questioning Paul, What right do these pastors have to be offended by it? I always say that. Come on, who do you think
That's
you are?
true.
Nobody's that important. Nobody's that important. If anybody had a right to say, "Don't question me," it would have been Paul. I mean, really, he actually was used to write scriptures.
Hmm.
So I'm like, when people do that to me, I kind of like walk away, don't go back. I'm like, well, I mean, who do you think you are? Really? Who do you think you are? You don't. No one's beyond being asked a question, or being given. Now, there's a way to do it. That's why I say, well, talk to them after church by yourself. Don't front them in front of other people. You don't want to embarrass them,
Right.
right? But there's a way to.
Right.
But they're like mad because you asked a question. Well, I'm sorry. That says something about his character. That's how that's just how I think about that. I just do. I put a lot of stock in trying to study and the people to ask questions. If I don't know what an answer, I'll just say I don't know. There's nothing wrong with saying I don't know, or I was wrong about that one. Let me be correct here. I may not
Mhm.
find it. And people say I'll find the answer. Maybe I will. Maybe I won't. Right? But
Mhm.
I don't have a right to be perturbed because somebody asked me a question. And I'm not like Paul. I can't write scriptures. Neither can anyone else today write their own scriptures. They'd be heretics if they did. Right? And so I'm like, okay, he got mad because you asked the question. Really? He thinks too highly of himself. So,
It's true.
okay. Any other? Sorry about that. Getting on that soapbox. That's one of my soapbox issues. Any other questions or comments? We want to thank everybody for being part of the Bible study. We're about to start our prayer meeting. If you've been watching us on YouTube, you found the lesson helpful, please remember to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. You can also click the bell icon. You'll be notified whenever we stream a new lesson. Right now, though, you can join us in prayer by clicking on the link I provided in the description below. If you're not able to join us, then we thank you and we'll see you next time in the scriptures.